Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's February 16th. We've just had Valentine's Day. Roses are red, violets are blue, space is empty, and I've got some news for you. And of course, we're starting the deep space updates with all the rocket launches from the past couple of weeks. So, going back to January, 30th of January, SpainSat NG, or New Generation, launch on a Falcon 9 to geostationary orbit. It's going to take up the 29 East position. So this is a geostationary communication satellite, and notably the booster, number 1073, was expanded in this mission to give the performance needed. 1st of February, we had 22 Starlink satellites launching out of Vandenberg into Group 11-4. 2nd of February, we had an H322S carrying a satellite called Mishibiki 6, or also known as QZS-6. That is a quasi-zenith satellite system. And this is like a sort of interesting thing Japan has. It's a multi-satellite GNSS, or GPS augmentation system. Now, this particular satellite is in geostationary orbit, but there's 3 others that are in inclined geostationary orbit. So there's always one sitting like more or less directly over Japan. And this provides extra global navigation signals when you have a lot of tall buildings around you, which is apparently common enough in Japan that they set up a satellite system for this. 4th of February, we had a Falcon 9, Starlink, 20 satellites out of Slick 40, Group 12-3. 4th of February also saw a Falcon 9 out of Launch Complex 39A carrying 2 Worldview satellites for Maxar, Worldview Legion number 5 and number 6. So they've already had a couple of these launches. These particular ones, I believe, have gone into 45-degree inclination orbits at about 520 kilometers. In Russia, on the 5th of February, we had a Soyuz 2.1V. And if you remember, that is the Soyuz which is not actually a Soyuz because doesn't have the external boosters that come off. So this is carrying 3 satellites, Cosmos 2581 through 2583. Presumably, these are, observation satellites, reconnaissance. So these went into polar orbit, 580 kilometer altitude at 81 degrees. Now, this is also probably the last launch of a Soyuz 2.1V. So this is like a single stick version of the Soyuz, and it uses an engine which is called the NK-33, which is pretty much the engine which was designed for the N1 moon rocket back in the 1960s, early 1970s. And I'm not saying that this is the same engine like design. This is literally the engines they built for that rocket, and when the program was shut down, they were put in a warehouse, and then they were later taken out of the warehouse. They were used to launch the early Antares rockets, which the one that famously exploded was powered by a version of this was retooled by Aerojet. So anyway, I believe that means this is the end of NK-33 derived launch vehicles. So something of an end of an era, but hey, it wasn't a real Soyuz anyway, so I'm not going to miss you. 8th of February had a Falcon 9, 21 Starlink, Group 12-9 out of Slick 40. 8th of February, we had Rocket Lab launching a space mission called IoT for you and me, carrying once again 5 satellites for Kinéis out of Mahia. So this is the 4th launch from that program. They're carrying the satellites into 643 kilometer orbits, sun synchronous. These are like 16U CubeSats that are about 28 kilograms each. They have like big antennas that pop out so that they can talk to Internet of Things devices across the surface of the Earth. Now, this was originally going to launch on February 4th, but they actually had to stand down because they realized the launch would potentially be conflicting with the International Space Station. So they had what's called a COLA, a collision on launch avoidance assessment or whatever. So they had to basically stand down. Anyway, moving onwards. 10th of February, Falcon 9 out of Vandenberg Space Force Base, which would have looked great if it wasn't cloudy. Again, this was one of those sunset, twilight launches. 22 satellites, Group 11-10. 11th of February, we set a Long March 8A. So this is the debut of a slightly upgraded version of the Long March 8. So this is carrying 9 satellites called Hulian Dai. So it's also known as SatNet LEO Group 2. So this is the second batch of satellites for the Go-Wang mega constellation. But yeah, Long March 8A is the sort of bigger story here. Main difference is the second stage is expanded from 3 meters wide to about 3.35 meters wide, and it uses an upgraded set of engines. These are now the YF75H, which apparently now get more than 10 tons of thrust thanks to higher, faster performing turbopumps. 11th of February, Falcon 9, 21 Starlink satellites, Group 12-18 out of Slate 40, and 15th of February, another Falcon 9 carrying 21 Starlink satellites into Group 12-8 from Slate 40. But this one is notable because Booster 1067 flew for the 26th time, so once again pushing the number out there with a Starlink launch. And there's a couple of things that we also happened in the last couple of weeks that are worth talking about. Blue Origin's New Shepard flew, and this time it was a lunar gravity mission. So this was first time they've done this. The idea is they launched it February 4th, and once the capsule separates, the reaction control thrusters spun the capsule up to 11 RPM. And in that situation, the objects, the experiments out at the edge, are experiencing roughly lunar gravity for about 2 minutes. This let them do a number of experiments. They had something like 29 payloads on board, doing things like in situ resource utilization, dust mitigation, things like that. On the way back down, one of the parachutes didn't deploy all the way, but eventually it did, so that was fine. Also, Blue Origin's Blue Ring may actually be a bit of a ring itself. So yeah, this was not clear during the last episode, but it's become clearer that it does look, first of all, the Blue Ring spacecraft was supposed to deorbit. There were like NOTAM zones for it to come down. It didn't do that. It looks like there was a bunch of debris or something released, possibly. Some of it may have evaporated, some of it may be propellant that evaporated, but last I've checked, there may be up to 60 pieces of debris, but not all of these may be permanent. Still, it's not a great showing for your first launch called Blue Ring to make a ring around the Earth. India also had an issue with its launch for a navigation satellite. It was supposed to go up to geostationary orbit, but when it got there, the circularization burn never happened, and so the spacecraft came back down, and it's in a highly eccentric orbit. And they're trying to figure out what they can do with this satellite, which isn't going to be able to make it to its final mission, or final target orbit. And yes, the news that I've been talking about in space a lot recently has been the asteroid 2024 YR4, and I made a couple of videos on that, including a guide on how to save the world and make sure that it doesn't hit us. But right now, the probability is about 2.1%. We haven't had any more observations in the last week or so because it's not going to add anything. It's now getting faint enough that the sort of medium-sized 4-meter telescopes can't see it. Eventually, we're going to have to switch over to the 8-meter telescopes, and their time is really expensive, so you only want to take rare observations just to extend the arc. And then there will be space observations which may be carried out as late as June. And we know that JWST is going to be pointing itself at this to collect more data. It will not just be able to get astrometry, because it's in space and because it has great infrared capabilities, it will probably be able to help characterize and maybe pin down the size of the object a little more, because we would like to know better than a factor of 2 the size of the radius, because that's pretty large range of options. Having said that, even if we get observations up to June, it's entirely likely that we will not know until 2028 whether this is in fact going to hit the Earth. And while I'm talking about the JWST, I should probably highlight one of the coolest photos it's released this year. That is this protoplanetary disk showing, basically dust grains which are collapsing and slowing down, and these will be accreting and coalescing ultimately into planets. And hey, since I'm giving some love to optical astronomy, how about LIGO? They observed a high probability gravitational wave event on February 6th, and then at exactly the same time, the IceCube neutrino telescope in the South Pole, they observed a neutrino burst at the same time, and it sounds like a radio telescope may have also detected a fast radio burst event at the same time. So this is like possibly a first to see an event so quickly in so many different forms, right? Multi-messenger astronomy is a great way to find a whole bunch of new physical processes. Also in the news was the highest energy neutrino ever observed, This is by the kilometer cubic neutrino telescope, which is basically an array of light sensors that are underneath the ocean. They observed a neutrino event with an energy of 220 peta-electron volts, which is only about 0.035 joules of energy. It's not the highest cosmic energy cosmic ray by any means, but a neutrino has vanishingly small rest mass energy. So this is an enormously energetic particle, considering that it just passes through most things without stopping. Definitely worth talking about that kind of thing, because I have no idea what kind of process could generate particles of that kind of energy. Okay, now human spaceflight. NASA's Crew 10 is going to be launched a little earlier. They were planning to launch Crew 10 on a new Dragon capsule, which was being constructed, but it is lagging behind, and that led to SpaceX pushing back the launch date from February to late March. Now SpaceX have decided to switch the Crew 10 over to Endurance, which is, was being refurbished. It's basically going to be ready to go a couple of weeks earlier. So Crew 10 are going to get up there and they'll be able to bring Crew 9 home, which now includes Butch and Sunny. So yes, SpaceX are sort of fixing some of the problems again. But again, they are not stuck up there. They're probably having a fine time. But yes, Boeing should really get their act together. And by the way, Boeing in the last couple of weeks announced that they're taking another like $500 million bid or charges on their Starliner program. So at this point, it seems that Boeing have spent something like $2 billion on Starliner, and they still haven't actually got that much, in terms of payments from NASA. Yeah. Okay, moving onwards, in Europe, Europe have actually put up the money for their Argonaut lunar lander. So this is going to be a contract with Thales Alenia and to build the lunar descent engine stage for the Argonaut lander. This is going to be ultimately part of Europe's sort of version or contribution to Artemis, to the ongoing exploration of the moon. They'll be able to put a couple of tons onto the the lunar poles. So this is Europe starting down that path. But of course, Artemis is a NASA-led program, and NASA is undergoing a bunch of changes right now as a result of the new administration. So Jared Isaacman, yes, he is nominated for NASA administrator, but the paperwork still has a long way to go at this point. The Senate is not going to be hearing him anytime soon. He is currently very quiet, not wanting to say anything which might jeopardize his potential nomination. Meanwhile, we have an acting administrator that's basically passing down the executive orders, and these have led to a bunch of meetings being cancelled and funding being stopped. But there's a lot of small things like, sorry, you're not allowed to display rainbows anywhere, which sucks if you do spectroscopy. And anyway, Artemis, of course, is heavily involved with SLS, and SLS people are, of course, circling the wagons. They expect something to happen. And we've seen, for example, various people involved talking about how good the current Artemis 3 plan is, how it's the only way to get to the moon in time ahead of China. Boeing preemptively brought its employees together and said, hey, we're going to have to fire a bunch of you because they want to cancel SLS. This is, of course, a big part of Boeing performing for its friends in the Senate, who will ultimately hold the purse strings on this. So we don't know what's going to happen anytime soon, but understandably in the next few years there's going to be transformations. SLS, I don't see it lasting, but I just don't know how many launches it's going to get. Gateway, it does seem sort of irrelevant, like we could do a lot of things without it. On the other hand, it's where a lot of the international agreements are. There are international partners who want to build bits for Gateway, and suddenly that means you have to renegotiate all these international partners things. So, yeah. Another interesting cost-cutting thing, thing that happened at NASA in the last couple of weeks is NASA said, hey, industry, does anybody want to launch the NASA Viper rover to the moon? So the company that did this, they would get the NASA, sort of the Viper hardware, they'd have to finish it, and pay for the launch and landing, and then share all the data for free. So I'm really not sure what NASA's thinking here. But on the other hand, Astrobotic, who were being paid to carry the Viper lander, they haven't found a replacement payload, or they hadn't found a replacement payload until just last week, where now it looks like Astrolab is going to fly their Flip lunar rover on the Griffin 1 lander. Now, Flip is like a subscale version of their larger Flex rover, the Flexible Logistics and Exploration rover. So this is like, Flip is smaller, it's similar in mass to Viper, it's about like 500 kilograms with up to 30 kilograms of payload. I don't know if it has any payloads right now, but I'm still not seeing what's going on with Viper and how this is a good thing, but I'd like to see it launch. Okay, over in Russia on February 6th, Roscosmos head Yuri Borisov was replaced by Dmitry Bakanov. I can't honestly tell you what Yuri Borisov did for the last couple of years, only that he wasn't Dmitry Rogozin, which was good because Dmitry had some rather personal injuries in Ukraine. But yeah, Dmitry Bakanov is like the Deputy Minister of Transport, and he was involved with the Gonets satellite constellation. One of the things he did was apparently he replaced a bunch of Ukrainian hardware or Western hardware with Russian hardware in these satellites. So he might be able to sort out some of Russia's issues with sourcing hardware, or maybe not. Stoke Space have unveiled Andromeda 2, their second stage engine. Now, originally they flew their test hopper with something which has now been retroactively renamed Andromeda 1, but since then there's been a bunch of redesign in terms of the plumbing, the turbo machinery. They've dropped from 30 nozzles down to 24. The heat shield geometry has changed to be a single continuous curve with the nozzles embedded in it rather than having that lip section, and this apparently improves their performance. Also, the nozzles themselves apparently adapt between sea level and vacuum performance. I'm presuming this is like a step nozzle design or something, because I can't see any other way this would work. So yeah, they have been improving this. Also, they've shown that the design is intended to extend out beyond the edges of the booster below it. So it's designed to be wider, and that means that the nozzles essentially fire into free space, enabling them to perform hot staging without having like a massive heat shield and vents on top of their booster. So interesting work going on there from Stoke Space. Down in Mojave, VAST are testing the structural qualification article for their Haven 1 space station. Yeah, they got this on a test stand, and they're going to be pressurizing it, running through pressure cycles, taking it up to like 1.8 atmospheres, verifying that it's not going to leak. Now that they've got this far in the fabrication, they know a little more about what it'll take to build the actual VAST, Haven 1 space station. And this means that the launch is now no earlier than May of 2026, and that's based on their understanding of the whole process. If that does go up, the idea is it'll launch, and then a month later they will launch a spacecraft, a Crew Dragon spacecraft, to dock with it, rendezvous, and have the first crew hang out there. So that's pretty cool. During the Super Bowl, we had some space-based ads, or sorry, space-themed ads. Specifically, T-Mobile were advertising for people that wanted to join their satellite Starlink, cell phone program. And it's interesting because apparently they are allowing people that have other contracts, people that don't have T-Mobile contracts, say you have AT&T or Verizon, you can pay to have satellite service through T-Mobile. Now, there's currently a very limited number of places, and I expect that they have all been taken. But yeah, we are having ads for satellite phones during the Super Bowl. We're here, right? That's it. Like, we are going to be saying goodbye to cell phone dead zones in the next decade or so. Down in Boca Chica, SpaceX have been performing tests for their next flight. The flight article, the booster, is going to be booster number 15. It rolled out, did a sort of engine test, rolled back. More interesting was Starship number 34, which on the test stand performed a 56-second extended hot fire test. That was really working that flame trench hard. So according to SpaceX, they're doing this because they want to model different thrust levels and verify vehicle configuration. I think that this may be indeed related to the previous flight where the Starship had an engine failure that was a result of a propellant leak. It's very likely that there's like some vibration modes which caused fuel lines to maybe break and ultimately start leaking and cause the fire. So, maybe they took out too many clamps and now they got to put them back in and see if this will be more stable. Anyway, it was a very impressive test. We've seen multiple angles on this, and we're obviously progressing towards the next flight of Starship, possibly by the end of this month. I think it's pretty likely, but all the same, we just got to remember that there were some whole bunch of debris, some of which did in fact fall on people in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Over at the moon, Firefly's Blue Ghost has now entered lunar orbit, and landing is expected maybe like start of March, maybe. So we heard confirmation from Firefly that they had reached orbit on February 13th. So it performed a 4-minute, 15-second burn of its reaction control thrusters to slow itself down. And we have exact orbital parameters from amateur satellite watcher Scott Tilley, who showed that the period is, about 8 hours or so. We have a semi-major axis of about 46,000 kilometers. So it's a highly elliptical orbit right now, and they're going to start bringing it all the way down to a much lower orbit. This is a highly inclined orbit going over the pole, and right now the entire orbit is visible from Earth, but as the moon moves around the Earth, it's going to probably change. Also, Hakuto R, around the same time, it flew past the moon, but it didn't enter orbit. It used the moon's gravity to kick it up towards one of the Sun-Earth Lagrange points, where its orbit will be tweaked by the natural process of gravity, and it will come back to the moon and then enter orbit using a much lower delta V burn. So that's two different lunar spacecraft up there, and I think we've got another one launching in the coming days. So yeah, pay attention to that. But yeah, I think that is most of my updates. And in the next few days, if you're in the Bahamas, you might want to pay attention to SpaceX launches, because Starlink 10-12 is expected to land its booster within the waters of the Bahamas on the 18th of February. So that will be like a new thing to look for, and of course you'll be able to hear the awesome sonic booms. And there was actually a cool little paper that came out just this week covering why the Starlink, or why the SpaceX Falcon 9 booster actually has 3 distinct sonic booms when it's coming back down. I've been reading all about sonic booms since Boom Supersonic did their second test flight and announced their quiet boom travel thing. So yes, I think that's everything. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.